It's been a while since we did one of these, but welcome to a series that we're very proud of called Jewels in the Wasteland. Now, a few years ago, what was it, maybe 5 years ago or so, we did the first one of these here at AFS. My name's Lars Nilsson, by the way, I program for AFS. A few years ago, we did the first one of these, and we kind of thought, like, well, we'll do like 80 through 83, or 80 through 82, 83 through 86 or whatever, 87 through 89, and then we'll be done with it, and then we'll move on to some other decade. But as it turned out, we did the 80s. We did all sections of the 80s, and it wasn't like we didn't want to do the 90s. It wasn't quite like that. It was just kind of like, hey, you know that one movie, Rick, that you wanted to show? Now there's a new print of it. Now there's a restoration of that. Now the sort of rights issue with that film has become sort of uncomplicated, and we can actually show it. So, kind of, who knows what happens in the future? But we'll stay in the 80s for a little while. Certainly through this month's installment of this series. So the way this works for anybody who's coming to this series for the first time is I come up, I see a few words, like progressively fewer and fewer, like not this many words usually. And then I'll introduce our special guest, AFS founder and artistic director, Richard Linklater. He'll come up and he'll introduce the film. Sometimes has a lot to say about the film, sometimes like, hey, let's watch the film. And then we watch the movie, and then afterwards we bring these chairs up here, we sit down and we have a conversation. It's not exactly a Q&A, it's more of like kind of a discussion where somebody might sort of chime in with like, hey, I really liked this about it. And then, Rick will often have things to say about this or that element to the film. It's really an invaluable, I think, sort of gloss on the film, sort of commentary on the film from a guy watching it who loved these kinds of films a long time ago and has since gone on to become a master filmmaker. So I'm going to shut up in a minute, but not before I encourage all of you to join me in shutting up during the course of the movie, turning off your phone and all of that. It's a wonderful movie, and we're so happy to have this privilege to welcome to the stage at this time AFS Artistic Director Richard Linklater.
Thank you, Lars. Always hard to follow Lars's stand-up routines. It'll come down. But anyway, how many of you are attending for the first time at Jewels in the Wasteland? Show of hands. That's a lot. You've missed a lot of really good movies. But thanks for joining now. The beginning of this series, what it was I was kind of thinking, okay, I've lived through, I guess, 30 years of film history of a film medium that was only, 120 years old or so. So I was like, wow, I want to see these films again, but I really want to revisit the films that when I first got interested in filmmaking in the early 80s, the films I was seeing then, what I was excited about, what was really, grabbing my attention. And this was just a chance to kind of revisit all those films, but then also really examine the 80s. I think the 70s, I saw it being kind of solidifying as, that was the great decade, the last great decade of cinema, blah, blah, blah. But maybe it's kind of like, the Saturday morning cartoons were always best when you were a kid. I think in like the 80s, that's when I came of age. Am I kidding myself? But I think that was a pretty great decade, despite our title, which I think Lars picked, Jewels in the Wasteland. I kind of agree. Yes, the mainstream was a wipeout. The mainstream was ugly. It was a tough decade for auteurs. They were crapping on a lot of people. The Simpson-Bruckheimer studio model had taken, post Heaven's Gate. A lot of the films are auteurs in retreat, auteurs finding a way, struggling through the decade. But, damn it, it was a great decade. There's so many good films to show. We struggle so much with, to limit it. And I'm just trying to do a pretty good survey of the decade. And also just, again, I've been wanting to see Local Hero again forever. There wasn't a print, but then let's give it up to Lars, who finds a 35 print, original print. So, back to Lars. Anyway, so yeah, it's just incredible to watch this film. I assume a lot of you are watching this film for the first time. Who's watching? Yes, of course. 35 print. So my background, and this isn't academic or anything. I can just say I saw this film when it came out in early '83. I had seen Gregory's Girl, Bill Forsyth, this, just a wonderful Scottish director. His previous film, Gregory's Girl, had been kind of an indie played, specialty release. And so I really liked that film and just made note of it. And then I heard about this film and went to it. I remember the review. I was living in Houston at the time. And the local critic, Joe Layden, the great Joe Layden, said, his last line of the review is, "Go see this movie, tonight." He just, people love this movie, but it was never a big hit. You'll maybe see why. The tone of it is just this kind of sweet, beautiful movie, just a complete love letter to Scotland. And I remember living in Houston at the time, and there's a Houston connection with this movie. Burt Lancaster, the great Burt Lancaster, he was just aging into being such a wonderful older man after Atlantic City a few years before, which we showed. And he was just becoming this great, older man of cinema. And he plays this kind of eccentric, I guess he's the CEO of this Knox Oil and Gas. And I haven't seen this film since the day. I saw it twice then, and I just had this kind of warm glow all these years when I think of Local Hero. But I realized, I haven't sat down and watched that film again. I'll see how it holds up. But it's a big cult film. Like I was saying, it's just a love letter to Scotland. It's about this Houston oil company they send the little executive played by Pete Riegert, the great Pete Riegert, Animal House, Boone. He's just a wonderful actor. He's the American, the fish out of water, who comes to this beautiful little fishing village, this little village on the coast of Scotland called Furness. That's a fictional town. But and just kind of falls in with the locals. But you would think evil oil company coming to drill in the North Sea and build a refinery and buy out all the people. Sounds like one of those battles, right, on environment and everything. But this movie there's not one cliche in this movie. This movie is just so surprising and beautiful. I don't think I'm giving too much away. That it's just they're kind of, hey, we'll all make a lot of money and we can move to the big city. Or they just don't. Nothing is what you think, and it's just got this beautiful touch of magical realism. It's got a great score by Martin Knopfler. It's his first, the great Dire Straits were just kicking, they were just so good at this time. It's his first score. And like I said, it's kind of a magical movie. Even the Lancaster, he's more, you think he's this American crude guy, but you would think, but of course he's this eccentric guy who's much more interested in really astronomy and the night skies, and he's just this beautiful character. And I don't know how else to describe this film except it's just a total understated, magical little gem of a movie. And at least that's how I remember it. But let's talk about it after, and let's just enjoy this. And Lars and I will be up here after. Who else did I guess I don't know. There's a lady in it who may or may not be a mermaid. I don't know. So anyway, I could go on. We can talk about it after. All right. Well, thanks for being here, and we'll see you after.
In state-of-the-art mono.
Mono, 1983. Mono.
They switched to stereo shortly after that, I think.
Yeah, it's so great seeing the print, even the little scratchy things around it. The real changes.
Would you get a 35mm print? Is it like that blue that you see several times in the sky? It's just so vivid.
Yeah, so rich. So I was looking up, how Jules in the Wasteland, 80s, not the best decade for cinema. This is my point. Is it was a great decade for cinema. Yeah. But so if you went to this movie in February of '83, and you lived in an urban city, let's say Houston, here are other films that are playing at a theater near you at that very moment. Year of Living Dangerously, Tootsie, Sophie's Choice, Francis, The Verdict, and 48 Hours. Those are 6 really great movies. Very, very different. But that's just, can you imagine today, adult, look at all those movies. I don't know, just making a point.
Yeah, even kind of the sort of guilty pleasure movie that you would go to would be like a really good movie made by a really good filmmaker.
Yeah, like 48 Hours. That was the commercial thing, but it's very good.
Yeah,
so good. God, it was such a treat to see this again after all this time. I'm just amazed how much I remember. I remember like every little beat of it. Forsythe, he's such a master of like the understated, the quietly humorous, it's hilarious, isn't it? But in the most subtle of ways.
It almost feels like all the little details sort of hold together like a mobile, like in this sort of balance and suspension.
Yeah, here he has kind of a wonderful, I mean, it doesn't seem like much of a narrative, but it actually is if you compare it to his other movies. I don't know if you've seen, this is probably his most, in a way, cohesive story. If you want to, I'd say the next film, if you haven't seen any other films by Forsythe, watch Gregory's Girl. Gregory he was the drummer in the band, a couple years older than Gregory's Girl, but he's in this and reminds me, oh yeah, there's Gregory. So that's a wonderful movie. And then movies he did after this were Comfort and Joy, and I don't know if you've seen Housekeeping, Christy Lottie, that film, his other 80s movies. And then Being Human with Robin Williams in the early 90s. But he's still alive, he doesn't make many movies. He just never was a very commercial filmmaker. None of his movies ever did very well.
He hasn't made a movie in 20 years.
Yeah, I know, but and I was thinking, David Putnam, the producer, I was thinking back to the end of last time when we showed Ishtar. Putnam's, by that time he was running a studio, he was kind of the villain of that story. He had dumped the movie, he treated them poorly and all that, but he's sort of he's the hero of this in a way. He had read an article in a paper about I guess a U.S., I don't know if it was Houston-based, but a U.S. oil company trying to go into, it's just a little human interest story kind of thing. And he sent the article to Forsythe. He had liked Gregory's Girl and said, hey, you should write a movie about that. And then he gave him the backing to do this. So I don't know. It's a great, I guess, inverted redemption story. No, he'd done that before. He goes on to the U.S. and has a bad time in the studio system. But
in a weird way, like we look at films like this, like say, how did this happen? We don't have directors like that anymore. It's not so much that. Sometimes we don't have like money men and producers like that anymore.
Yeah, you don't have audience. It's just not the air we're breathing of what cinema. It just doesn't. It's not. It barely was then. I mean, this wasn't like a big hit or anything.
Yeah.
It was it's a wonderful anomaly kind of at the time. But so worth. It has a huge cult actually, especially in Scotland. They're very proud of it. That phone booth is still there if you want to visit. Apparently, gets calls all the time. If you go there, the phone will ring. And that town is Peenan on the. I went to Scotland. That's my family's like the old country of. So I went there a couple years ago. It's as magical as seen in this movie. Beautiful skies, night and day, really long dusks. I was there in the summer, so it's a magical place, and the Scots are very. Oh gosh, they're such just wonderful people. Very proud, very specific to their country. They're Scotland. England is, but the British are like, oh, they're all one. The Scots are no. Harry Potter is Scottish. They're very specific. Andy Murray won Wimbledon for Scotland, not England. The Brits are like, hey, a Brit finally won. They're like, no, that was for Scotland. So.
I wonder if we have any questions, contributions, or anything from our audience here. I've just watched this film. Any impressions? Yeah, right over here.
Well, I heard you talking about the other movies that came out at the same time.
Yeah, they were.
One week I saw Cool Hand Luke and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And what I said to the person next to me was, when did Hollywood stop making movies? And no offense to you because you're independent, but when did Hollywood quit trying?
This is a big question.
I love the industry in a way, and I always think people have been saying this forever. In February of '83, the time I just referenced, and a lot of those films had opened in December of '82, and so they were still in theaters. That's another thing. Films like that would hang out longer in theaters. But I think it's always felt that way. It's always felt that the mainstream kind of sucks, and and they're not doing it like they used to and all that. But my point is, and that was the pervasive thought about 80s cinema, because there was a lot of dreck, and the culture was so bad, the Reagan Bush years and all. It was pretty ugly. It was a good time to be underground, but so many good movies, so I just think in spite of themselves, the industry does kick out a lot of films. And if you talk to the studio at that time, anywhere near the years near this movie, it would be like, oh yeah, that film didn't work, it wasn't very good. Because it didn't make any money, that's always been the threshold, but you gotta have a little faith. That said, things really do suck right now.
Well, on a certain level they do, but you look at the movies that play here at AFS.
Yeah, except here, by the way.
Seriously.
Just if you want to be safe, just come to what we're showing.
No, I'm serious. There've been like 11 great movies this year already. Like there really have been.
There always are. I'm exaggerating. I'm just saying it always feels that way.
And if you look back at that time, like even 48 Hours didn't get good reviews and stuff.
No, it's just it was just commercial crap.
But it's really good compared
so
to
well
now.
done,
Yeah.
So. And is everybody here a member of the Film Society? We didn't say that.
I'm sure they are.
That's a given. You wouldn't want to miss the opportunities of being a member here. It's the best deal in town.
You don't have to tell these people, do they?
Yeah, you'd be ashamed to be here. Not be a member.
I wonder if we have any other contributions right over here.
We must have 2,500 members. Should we do a thing? Whoever gets to be the 2,500th member, we should give them a free popcorn or something.
Free popcorn. Free small popcorn.
Small.
But right over here.
We're close.
Was the David Putnam you referenced also the one who was involved in producing Chariots of Fire?
Yeah, the great British producer. The British are coming. Yeah, Chariots of Fire, a lot of great. I mean, he's a really noted, pretty substantial career. I was just ragging on him about his Hollywood days. He kind of came in to, revamp Hollywood and hit it a little too hard. So it wasn't a good fit.
Yeah, let's see, right over here,
I was thinking when I saw The Wicker Man a couple weeks ago when you all showed it at AFS, and I was thinking this would be a great double feature with The Wicker Man. Because it's about somebody that comes to a small town with preconceptions about the way they live their life.
Yeah.
And both of them kind of end the film kind of changed and
Yeah, that's for sure.
That it's not necessarily bad, but different from what he was coming in with.
I don't know, but to their credit here, I don't think McIntyre had much of a preconception, did he? He's just going there to make a deal. He's not thinking of anything more than the business. I think what's fun here is you see his transformation. It's not forced, it's not anticipated, it's just the atmosphere, the people, the sky just slowly gets into him. It's so subtle. You just see a look, a glance. I think other people would have hit that much harder, and by the end it's very consistent, and by the end he's wanting to switch places there with Gordon. That's such a funny scene. He's drunk and he's like, $80,000 a year, You know what's a good double feature with this film? I was watching it, and it's one we're showing a week from tonight, Lost in America.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a yuppie 80s film, and it's sort of a flip side. He gets transformed. In Lost in America, a week from tonight, is Albert Brooks willfully rejects his yuppie status and goes looking for what McIntyre finds so naturally here. Albert Brooks is trying to find it, He's trying to be Easy Rider, but he just can't help it. He's just too much of a yuppie. He's too much of a lost cause. And that's really one of the funniest films of the 80s. It's probably one of the biggest over comedies we've shown in the whole series. So come back for that. But I was thinking that's actually a nice, and it's kind of a bookend to this movie. Because I think it was happening culturally. The culture was going totally material, yuppie. That's a real thing, with people bragging about their cars. And Albert Brooks is obsessed with his Mercedes. Mm-hmm. He's obsessed with his Porsche. I'm just thinking of connections here. And I think artists and other people is like, is that how we're supposed to live? Is that what we should be thinking about? Is that the priorities? So you see it in the work, So But Wicker Man, I'm still not sure. It's such a-
Rick, you talked about the subtlety with which we sort of see Mac's sort of transformation. There's one part in it, there's one shot in it that I thought was like almost like a little on the nose. And I was wondering, do you know the shot I'm talking about, where we see the watch in the tide, where the tide's washing over, and it's almost like it hits it a little hard to me. What did you think of that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's that hard. How many of you thought that was just over the top hard? 1, 2. Yeah, it's pushing it.
Yeah.
It's pushing it, but
Right on the edge.
yeah. You know,
Maybe, yeah.
yeah. You know, the only thing that actually rubs me at all is it's just the receptionist, Max Oil and Gas. They're kind of, as a Texan, they were hitting that a little hard. Just answer the damn phone. You know. My only complaint, Mr. Forsythe, my only.
It's one of the most subtle movies ever, and we're
Except for damn
covering
Southern
a couple of things. Yeah, yeah. Right over here, I see firsthand. I saw right back here.
I just spent 2 weeks in Scotland last summer, and
Where'd you go in Scotland?
from Edinburgh to
You got on a train and-
to,
It's
Isle of Mull,
yeah.
but ended up back in Edinburgh, and on the final night we went to the new musical of Local Hero.
Yeah.
It was
It's a local,
absolutely fabulous.
a musical of Local Hero.
Knopfler wrote 18 more songs for the musical.
Yeah.
It had its debut there in Edinburgh. Started in March and ended last weekend. I had the pleasure of seeing it a couple
Wow.
weeks ago. It was just fabulous. It's moving to London next year.
Oh, good.
Whether it comes to the US, I don't know.
Let's bring it here.
But-
That's great news. I haven't even heard of it.
It was the last night of our trip, but for 2 weeks leading up to it, I kept asking locals, you know, what do you know about Local Hero? And they would just light up.
Yeah.
They
Every single Scot loves this
love
movie.
this movie, and it's like you said at the opening, it's a love letter to Scotland.
Yeah.
And the locals I talked to absolutely believe it.
Wow.
It was fabulous.
What a musical.
It's
Is it
great.
the same story, kind of?
They were stayed true to the story.
Yeah.
And it was just experiencing the story in a different way, but it was very true to the story. Yes.
That's great.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to see that. That's worth
Got
the
here's
trip.
this "Bring It Here,"
Yeah.
which is like, settle down.
Stay with me.
Yeah.
We'll take your checkbook in a minute. We'll mount a
That's
musical.
wonderful. You know, I heard in Knopfler's hometown, the local football team, that's the
Yeah.
song
Oh,
of
wow.
the
Whenever the
Going home.
players come on the field, that ending theme. that
yeah, the
they-
last song. That's their theme song.
Cool.
Isn't that great?
It's really amazing. How about in Houston? If you go to Houston, do they know the movie? No, probably not.
Yeah, I don't know if it ever penetrated Houston yet. And you know, in Houston, I was thinking about this in relation, you know, Paris, Texas was 1 year later. It's interesting to see Houston as kind of the symbol of modern
Mhm.
urban alienation.
Yeah.
You know, in both cases, Houston's used in a kind of a similar way.
Yeah.
You know, a town to just feel lost in, which isn't, you know, if you grow up there, you don't feel that way. But I could see how people would feel that.
Mike, yeah.
You know, well, it's funny because I was going to ask that question. Like, Houston was like a character in so many movies from the '60s with Thief Who Came to Dinner,
Right.
and Hellfighters, and Brewster McCloud, and this. Like, there was a period of maybe 20 years. Even Rollerball,
Yeah.
Houston was like, I don't even know if that
Yeah,
was
but they're
shot there,
these
but it was a
specific Houston.
character.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen anymore. Like, Houston was, you know, this commerce and energy or whatever.
It symbolized something.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it still kind of is that, but it's never portrayed.
Houston's definitely the most underrepresented big city with
Yeah.
a lack of identity, I think, in the cinematic and TV like imagination of our country. You can name all the other top 10 big cities and there's a feel to them. Houston people is even like the Astros, people are like, what, who are they? It's just kind of not a big identity, but we love it. To me, that is an identity, the kind of status of no status. You get used to it, as a Texan and a Houston.
I see a hand right back here.
Yeah, so I'm about 45, and I grew up in the 80s. That's when I started watching movies. And I think my favorite movies at the time were like Brazil and RoboCop and Repo Man. This movie made me think of Repo Man, where there's a certain kind of like baked-in sensibility that corporations aren't to be trusted, like where you could, where audiences would get kind of like, I guess, they're all in on the joke. And that seems to have gone away. You're kind of tangential related to that guy's question. I don't know. I mean,
Is that sort of non-corporate, anti-corporate?
it sounds stupid when I say it, but it's
But yeah, there was definitely an anti-corporate, well, that was just the punk, hippie, ethos of the
now you get Tony Stark.
the era.
Tony Stark is
Yeah, no, I think it's its own little discussion in a way, but yeah, the total embracing of commercialism, and you see it in even fans. Like at this era, if you were young and kind of cool, it was you wouldn't be embracing anything that was just so brazenly commercial. Like that was a bad impulse. And now, every person under 25 lined up to see Avengers last weekend, or whatever, just without any, it's just total embracing of just that commercial. I don't know, maybe it's a good movie.
You think it's
But
going to change though? I mean, that's the thing.
What's that?
You think it's going to change? I mean, like a movie like that would never get made today. It'd be on Netflix.
No, yeah. I think they get made, you just don't see them. They certainly don't get distributed. They don't really. But I think there are people aspiring, and you do catch a little bit of this every now and then. I think for sure, it's just they don't get much of a whiff of a mainstream. I think it's harder for films like this to have a cultural impact. Like I said, it didn't really in the day. Let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a big hit. It wasn't, but it was embraced, and it's once you see it, you don't forget it, and it's just kind of a classic cult film, I guess. It means a lot to the people it means a lot to.
In a weird kind of way, where to look for that kind of film right now is going to be from Nigeria or the Philippines. It's like there are or South America.
Yeah, just Japan, Shoplifters. There's so many good films worldwide. If you think of world cinema, nothing's changed. You can find that. It's just, you got to go looking.
It's kind of cocktail hours somewhere in the world at all times, and it's sort of always like
there's national cinemas.
There's really interesting cinema happening in the world someplace at all times, even if it doesn't happen to coincide with where you are sometimes.
Yeah.
I wonder if we have maybe a couple more right over here.
So I wanted to get back to your point about the subtlety in the film, which I agree with a lot, except for the psychologist.
Yeah. Well, that's not subtle at all. It's not supposed to be, right? That's the weird. Now, does anyone know that was some holdover therapy? There was that humiliation type therapy in the 70s that kept it. I forget what it was called. Was it S?
That was Landmark Forum.
Yeah. So I think he's doing a riff on that. Happer's agreed to a little bit. Yeah, it's such an odd little subplot, but it is pretty hilarious. My favorite moment is when he hangs up the phone and then has that instinct to just. Remember that? Remember where he used to have landlines? If you never hung up, you're on the phone forever. That was a dirty trick, actually. You could call someone and never hang up your line, and then they get a busy signal all day. Remember that old trick? They're still there.
It was probably really tempting to have like an actor as good as Burt Lancaster, who's just incredible.
Yeah.
To be able to throw him into a situation like that and go, it would just be so great. Like playing an incredible instrument or driving a great car or something,
Yeah, he's so wonderful. Yeah, he gives him something to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Even his last line online, shoot to kill. That's so dark. Might they really shoot him off a building? It is Texas after all. They might just shoot him. I don't know what happened to the guy.
I think you assume that they do. Pretty great. the first hand.
I'm sorry.
Oh, either way.
I was gonna say, Peter Capaldi, I just was, I totally forgot that was him. What was his art to Doctor Who from, I just sort of lost track of
Was
it.
he Where did I see him that he was in? He was in something.
In the loop?
In the Loop, he's great, and in the Loop. Lair the White Worm, that's exactly the one I was thinking of.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that movie's
Totally forgot that.
bazonkers, by the way.
Yeah, it's fun to see those
Yeah,
careers.
right over here.
I was just thinking, it takes a lot in a film to have a whole town that's so charming that they could kill a wounded bunny and feed it to you. Still magically charmed by this town. They've forgotten that you killed your wounded bunny.
Yeah, that's my least favorite moment in the whole scene. I had forgotten that. I remembered the movie so well. I was like, oh yeah, they killed the bunny.
But they kind of make you forget it because you fall in love with this town along with it, which is I think the magic of the movie. It's
Yeah.
a sweet thing.
Also, who's baby?
I know. Was that the most hilarious moment when the guy who's back then they just all this subtle looks? What a weird thought. What a weird thing. I mean, that's why the film's so unique. Who else would do that? Who else would do that?
And the motorcycle, like
Yeah,
the guy in the motor, like
one
what's
guy
his
on the
deal?
motorcycle. Yeah. I don't know. And even in scenes he's not actively almost running over, you see him in the distance all he's just there, but they embrace him, he's a local.
You can almost see the mechanism by which some of that stuff would get taken out of a movie by notes.
Yeah.
Somebody would have given notes. Yeah, I think we got to lose the motorcycle.
Yeah, it doesn't really go anywhere.
Right.
We got to resolve it.
Right. Yeah. Tell me more about the backstory of the motorcycle.
Yeah,
guy.
it's gotta something.
Yeah.
Like, it'll leave people wondering. Yeah, it's just. Yeah, I don't think this film had many notes.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like it. Feel like it.
Which tells you.
Yeah, that's just kind of what it is.
Tells you a little bit about the value of notes, maybe, possibly. Right over here. Yeah.
I was going to ask, because you had mentioned that you saw in the newspaper some critics said go see this. I know what it's like for me these days to get movies on my radar. It's super easy with the internet. But back then, like, how were you tracking down Bill Forsyth's movie? Other, big, like, who would eventually become like, highly regarded filmmakers, but then and there they weren't making big hits. How were they on your?
Let me repeat the question for people who couldn't hear that. So, how were you? Well, you mentioned Joe Layton's review, like, made you want to go see this. How were you sort of tracking, and how were films kind of appearing on your radar at the time?
Well, if you're a film buff, you're reading a few film magazines. You're getting Film Comment and American Film and anything else you can get your hands on. You're kind of aware of upcoming films for the month, or But I had seen Gregory's Girl at a film festival, actually, the Houston Film Festival, and I'm not sure it even played much. I think it maybe a little bit in theaters, but so I had kind of remembered him, and then I saw, oh yeah, here's this next film. So I kind of had a look out for it. I think I'd even read an article maybe about. In the publicity for the movie, there was an article about it that mentioned the Putnam, where it started. He sent him the article, so I just kind of, vaguely on there. People were, people knew a lot of stuff before the internet. You could get it. You'd find out word of mouth. Theaters had a bunch of flyers for upcoming things. Not much. It wasn't hard.
Did you read Variety in those days?
Hell no.
No.
Still not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So magazines, whatever. It just seems like, and films got, I guess, were there less? I guess compared to the oversaturated media world now with so many streaming films and all that, But I think all films they seem to all get a lot of coverage and play. It was a big deal, and it was in the indie world especially. That was what was kind of wonderful about the 80s. Like the indie films got treated, really respectfully. We'll be showing 2 weeks from now two super low budget films. I think will be a good example to see, like, American indies, no budget movies that I'm very curious to see again. One that's pretty well known, Return of the Secaucus 7, John Sayles' first film, kind of a classic, an indie staple. But Wayne Wang's Chan is Missing is also that $20,000 black and white film. Like, this guy just made a film, you know. And I remember it being kind of a big deal, you know, watching it and looking forward to it, and seen it a couple times, and it was just, you know, like, wow, you made a film. There just weren't that many films made. You know, indie films, there were probably, you know, 15 a year that would come out. And each one kind of seemed to get, maybe more, but, you know, they'd get their moment.
It was kind of a big deal when
And stay in theaters too, and play for months.
Yeah, Siskel and Ebert would sometimes highlight like a
Yeah.
really small film, and that was a big deal for the film.
Yeah, big
obviously.
boost, yeah.
Yeah, they call it a sleeper,
Yeah.
and they'd highlight it.
Yeah, they were champions of a certain kind of cinema. Yeah, so.
Was their TV show around?
The
Sure.
TV show, yeah.
Yeah, that was, it was just called Siskel and Ebert, and then eventually.
Sneak previews first. and it
Sneak
was-
previews was on PBS.
Yeah, and they did that, and it was
then
Siskel and Ebert at the movies.
At the movies was more of a network. I think they got a bigger deal. But yeah, for years they were just sneak previews on the PBS station.
And
But I would
everybody
watch that
watched it.
really, yeah, you
Yeah.
had to, yeah, because you'd be hearing about films for the first time, and or it was hitting, you know, certain films on your radar, and you just wanted to see what they were saying about the big films. But then they'd also highlight these other films. So.
Do you have any critics now that you're just like, oh well, if David Edelstein likes it, I like, or anybody?
Not really. I mean, I just read the same. Yeah. I don't know. It's so easy now with, you know, back then you had to kind of look it up, or
Mhm.
you know, go out of your way to read, you know, the New York Times review, or they'd print reprints and stuff. Now you can just go online and read whatever you want anytime. So that's convenient. It's
You just
nice.
have to go to the library.
Yeah.
And get like a newspaper on a big like
Right.
wooden rack.
Or you'd wait for that Pauline Kael review,
Yeah.
or that, you know, those were big. In the New
Yeah,
Yorker,
yeah.
you get those 2 films a week
Yeah.
that were written about. That was a big deal. Or, you know, all the New York critics. It was all out of New York. But even like Texas Monthly, the world of criticism, very different back then. Texas Monthly, for instance, had a film column. And it was just two or three film reviews every month.
Mhm.
You know, one of our patron saints, George Morris, he passed away in '89, but he was instrumental in, you know, the early days he was kind of a mentor to myself and my friends. He was about 20 years older. He had the beat for Texas Monthly. You had to live in New York to be a film critic, because that's where they did all the screenings. But he wrote for Texas Monthly, so, you know, for years, until he gave Urban Cowboy a bad review.
That was it.
After the editor told him, hey, kind of go easy on this film. He's like, okay.
Like Pauline Kael with
Yeah.
Sound of Music.
Don't, yeah.
But you know, it's a trip is to go to Perry Castaneda Library and find all the old bound volumes of all the movie magazines and just other magazines at the time, and go back and just spend an afternoon reading the reviews and stuff. It's pretty amazing. It gives you an idea what film culture was like.
That's one of my favorite things, yeah, to just pick up. Oh, June 1978, you know, what are they talking about? What are the films out? What are they excited about? It's
Yeah.
fascinating film dives.
What's it called again?
Perry Castaneda Library, one of the great
There were the-
buildings on earth.
These
actually.
things called libraries that people went to look up stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like such an old thing.
But it's true. Right over here, yeah.
I grew up in a small town, you know, in the 80s, like, when Linklater was on, I watched that religiously, like, that was my favorite show on TV. I'd wake up and it was always on Saturday morning at a certain time, and I remember when they reviewed Being Human, and I hadn't seen it at the time, and I didn't know anything about Phil Forsyth, but they panned it. They loved his other films, and
Yeah.
now speaking about a time when critics actually had some power over films, like this guy brought up Brazil, like, that film was saved by critics. That film wouldn't have come out without critics. Being Human didn't come out because of critics. From the way I understand it, it was like panned. And I don't know the story or anything, but it never really got released. And by the time it came out, everyone was just kind of like already accepted the fact that it was a horrible movie
Yeah.
and didn't give it a chance. And I don't understand how someone like him, that Forsyth, can make so many great movies, but one film that was sort of mediocre destroyed his whole career. Like, he stopped making movies after that.
And Being
That was
Human
the time
isn't a
of critics.
disaster. It's a worthwhile.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy Local Hero, Gregor's Girl, some of the others, but it's ambitious. And I mean, you know, it's 5 different stories, and the very last story, when it gets back to modern times, it's Robin Williams in all these different settings. It's really ambitious in its own way. It's just quirky and doesn't cohere so well. He's not like a natural storyteller in that way. but it's still got some great stuff.
It kind of reminds me of Keaton's Three Ages, like,
Yeah.
that's his sort of clunky attempt to pull these three stories together, you know, it didn't, and it works beautifully as that, but how
Yeah,
is-
but you're right. The critics they could make you or break you, and that was the era. And I think what's gone there, I think critics can still kill you. You know, like if there's a consensus out there of like, well, here it is. There's a certain kind of film that Hollywood has totally perfected, and they consider it just critic proof. It's marketing departments now greenlight films. Like, we can sell this, and it doesn't matter what anyone thinks. People are going to go see this because we know how to market it. And then there's this other category of films that scares the hell out of them. It's called execution dependent cinema. You hear that for the first time in a meeting or something in Hollywood. You're like, wait, what does that mean? Execution dependent? Isn't everything? No. It's not. It's like, oh, it means it has to really be good. It has to work. Well, if it doesn't, we got nothing. Because the critics, if they don't give it the best reviews, if it's like, oh, it's okay, but not the best film of the year, then they feel like they don't have a starting place. So it's really risky, and it is, but it's like, critics used to be able to, famously, Bonnie and Clyde throughout history, films came out, were misunderstood, and then a critic could kind of take it, reevaluate it that second or third week, and, revive it, and it would hang in there and become the hit it deserves to be. But you don't see that anymore. There's not the opportunity to do that. It's just not the way theatrical goes anymore.
Films don't hang around for multiple weeks.
You don't get a second weekend.
Yeah.
If it's something that doesn't work at first.
Mhm.
There's no like Kubrick cutting notes to all the theaters showing 2001 to cut 20 minutes out of the movie, like he did on 2001 between opening and a couple weeks in. It's unbelievable by modern standards that you could just kind of keep tinkering with your movie and slowly roll it out over a year to be the best and biggest hit of the year. But now you're kind of dead on arrival. It's just more immediate, more less room for like I guess first impressions are everything. Whereas it's kind of cool to see a critic go back. I mean, I mentioned George earlier. I would go back and read his reviews, and I said, George, you gave Raging Bull kind of a review. He's like, yeah, well, I don't like that. And I made him watch it again, and he's like, yeah, I was wrong. Critics sometimes in print would say, hey, I watched this film again. I see more in it. So it's a tough job. Reviewing films and with deadlines, and there's so many movies. That's really tough to do. So
yeah, I know for a fact that the Chronicle, like we try to get them, if we're showing a film, we try to get them a screener weeks in advance. But sometimes, like maybe other cinemas in this town, they're showing art films, get them the screeners 2 days before their deadline or whatever. So take this film, watch it, digest it, and spit out with an opinion that's definitive. That's not really a thing that anybody can do.
Yeah, think a couple days before you actually write your review.
Yeah, exactly.
Watch it again, or think about it again, check out another thing. No, but if you got to watch it and then write the review 30 minutes after watching it or something.
Yeah, you're writing the review as you're watching it.
No,
That's not proper. Truly.
Yeah, but yeah, well, guys like Forsythe, they need to be kind of on their own scale, I think. It's like, I do this with other filmmakers, it's like, well, is it their best? No, but it's better than 95% of everything. You got to kind of qualify it. So, especially at the masters, the people you have the highest anticipation for. It's always that first screening, It's I remember when Goodfellas opened. It's like, yeah, it's good, but it's not Raging Bull. It's not that. It's like, I'm gonna go again.
Yeah.
And you go, and it's like, oh, you know what? It's actually better. But it takes a few screenings, a few weeks to actually get over your preconceptions, and then So once you're that anticipated, Kubrick's last few films, he's in that category. I think so many,
Yeah, it's totally true.
Yeah, every Woody Allen film for like 20 years was, well, it's not Annie Hall in Manhattan. Those great 80s films. You're like, yeah, I kind of like it better. It's as good or better.
Because you go into it with like,
you just don't,
you bring your own sort of lunchbox, and it's like, well, this sandwich doesn't fit the lunchbox that I brought. Sort of, it's an entirely
Yeah.
different kind of sandwich.
Yeah, it takes a certain generosity. It is. Yeah, everyone should have the right to make a different sandwich. With,
Yeah, yeah.
With, what was it, roast beef with salt and
Yeah, and
mustard,
yeah.
but no.
That sounds pretty good, I gotta say. I'm not a vegetarian though. I think we need to wrap it up
Yeah.
because we've got like 6 of these to do this month. So, but tell us a little bit about Vagabond, which comes on Monday.
Vagabond, next Monday, which, this was on our calendar before the great Agnes Varda passed away recently, so it becomes a tribute screening to her. I saw it in the in the 80s when it came out. Just a wonderful young woman's movie. This Vagabond, Sandra Bernard, her debut. Haven't seen it in a long time. I just remember really liking it and thinking that would be a big hit, and I don't think it was. Like most of my favorite films of the 80s.
But it had like an echo effect.
Yeah, to this day, like all her films. So it's our tribute to her, and wonderful film. The rhythm of it and the atmosphere and tone. It's very special. So a good week next week. That on Monday, and Lost in America. We'll switch gears to a big comedy on
Two
the
very
great Albert
different-
Brooks movie on Wednesday. Couldn't be more different, but
Both road movies, but that's about it.
that's about it. Very different road movies.
All right. Thank you, Rick.
So hey, thanks for being here. So see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.